Sometimes the smallest accident opens the biggest truth, and the wrong door can lead to the right lesson. The executive floor of Romano Global Headquarters had grown unusually quiet after one of the longest board meetings of the year. Beyond the towering floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan shimmered beneath thousands of evening lights, while polished marble reflected the warm glow of elegant chandeliers stretching across the silent corridor. Every employee had already gone home except for a handful of executives finishing the final reports of the day. Daniel Romano walked alone through the hallway with his tailored charcoal suit jacket folded neatly over one arm, reviewing tomorrow's schedule from memory as he headed toward what he believed was the document archive beside the executive offices. Discipline had shaped every part of his life. At 39 years old, the white mafia boss rarely made mistakes, and those who worked around him often joked that the building itself seemed to adjust to his routine rather than the other way around. That evening, for the first time in years, routine quietly failed him. Earlier that afternoon, Naomi Carter had remained composed after a nervous junior accountant accidentally spilled an entire cup of coffee across the front of her white blouse only minutes before an important client presentation. Instead of becoming frustrated, the 29-year-old black executive secretary had smiled gently, reassured the young employee that everything was fine, handed him the presentation materials he had nearly dropped, and entered the meeting as though nothing had happened. Not one client suspected the inconvenience she had quietly endured. After the last conference room emptied and the final guests departed, Naomi carried a folded garment bag into the private employee changing room beside the executive offices, hoping only to replace her stained blouse before heading home. Daniel reached the familiar doorway moments later without lifting his eyes from the documents in his hand. He turned the handle, pushed the door open, and immediately realized his mistake. Naomi stood several feet away, calmly pulling on a fresh blazer after changing out of the coffee-stained blouse. Daniel instantly turned his head toward the hallway and stepped backward without hesitation. "I am so sorry," he said sincerely. "I opened the wrong door." There was no anger in his voice, only genuine respect for her privacy. Naomi quickly adjusted her jacket before answering with the same calm professionalism she displayed every day. "It is okay, Mr. Romano. It was an accident." Daniel reached for the handle to quietly close the door, but before it shut completely, something unexpected caught his attention. Resting carefully across a nearby chair was the blouse Naomi had planned to wear home. It was not new. The cuffs had been hand-stitched with thread matched so precisely that the repairs were almost invisible. The collar had been reinforced from the inside with patient craftsmanship. Beside the neatly folded garment rested a tiny sewing kit, its edges worn from years of careful use. Nothing about the scene suggested carelessness. Everything suggested quiet sacrifice. Daniel gently closed the door and remained standing in the empty hallway long after the moment had passed. Throughout the years, Naomi had coordinated multimillion-dollar negotiations, organized impossible schedules, welcomed international clients with flawless professionalism, and solved problems before anyone else even recognized they existed. Yet somehow he had never wondered what her own life looked like after she walked out of the office each evening. Surrounded by luxury, polished stone, and breathtaking city views, Daniel found himself unable to stop thinking about a carefully repaired blouse that revealed more about the woman who worked beside him than every resume, performance review, and business achievement ever could, and without realizing it, one accidental turn of a doorknob had quietly begun changing the way he would see both leadership and the people around him forever. The next morning, Romano Global Headquarters came alive long before the first rays of sunlight reached the glass towers of Manhattan. Security officers greeted employees with familiar smiles, elevators carried executives toward the upper floors, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the elegant lobby. Everything appeared exactly as it had every other business day, yet Daniel Romano noticed something he had somehow overlooked for years. Naomi Carter had already arrived nearly an hour before everyone else. The executive conference room was perfectly prepared. Every document rested in precise order. Every chair had been carefully aligned, and handwritten reminders about schedule changes had already been placed beside the morning briefing. When Daniel entered his office, Naomi greeted him with the same calm professionalism she displayed every day. "Good morning, Mr. Romano. Your first conference call begins at 8 o'clock. The legal team confirmed the revised contract, and your afternoon meeting has been moved forward by 30 minutes. Her voice remained steady, warm, and confident. Nothing about her behavior suggested that the previous evening had ever happened. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had always defined her. Throughout the morning, Daniel found himself observing details he had never considered important before. Naomi welcomed every visitor with genuine kindness, remembered the names of new employees after meeting them only once, and somehow anticipated problems before anyone else recognized they existed. When an anxious intern accidentally misplaced an important presentation folder only minutes before an executive meeting, Naomi calmly located the missing documents, reassured the young employee that mistakes were part of learning, and quietly restored his confidence before anyone else noticed the situation. Later that morning, the elderly receptionist struggled to carry several heavy supply boxes across the reception area. Before anyone could ask, Naomi gently took the boxes from her hands, walked them to the storage room, and returned only moments later without mentioning what she had done. She never waited for appreciation. She simply continued working as though helping people was the most ordinary part of her day. Daniel remained inside his office watching through the glass walls. Before the previous evening, he would have described Naomi as exceptionally organized. Now he began recognizing something much deeper. Her professionalism was not separate from her kindness. They were woven together so naturally that most people only noticed the results, never the heart behind them. During the afternoon, Daniel passed the employee lounge while returning from a meeting. Through the partially open doorway, he noticed Naomi sitting beside a maintenance supervisor whose uniform sleeve had torn while moving office furniture. She quietly removed the same small sewing kit he had seen beside the carefully repaired blouse and patiently stitched the sleeve while they spoke about the supervisor's grandchildren. When she finished, she handed the uniform back with a warm smile and simply said, "Now it should last a little longer." The older man thanked her repeatedly before returning to work with visible gratitude. Daniel stood silently in the hallway for another moment before continuing toward his office. The image of the carefully repaired blouse suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Naomi did not repair clothing because she enjoyed sewing. She repaired things because she believed that anything cared for with love deserved another chance. Somehow that simple belief extended far beyond fabric. It reached frightened interns, exhausted coworkers, elderly employees, and perhaps everyone fortunate enough to cross her path. For the first time since they had begun working together, Daniel realized that the most valuable person inside his company might not be the one with the highest title, but the one quietly holding everyone else together without ever asking to be seen. As the days quietly unfolded, Daniel Romano stopped seeing the executive floor as a collection of offices and schedules. Instead, he began noticing the people who filled those spaces every day, and almost every discovery somehow led back to Naomi Carter. She never sought attention, yet her influence seemed to reach every corner of Romano Global headquarters. Early one Wednesday morning, Daniel arrived several minutes ahead of his usual schedule after an unexpected change to an overseas conference call. Passing through the reception area, he noticed Naomi placing a small bouquet of fresh flowers on the elderly receptionist's desk before anyone else had arrived. "Happy birthday," she whispered with a warm smile. The older woman laughed softly with grateful tears in her eyes. "You remembered again." Naomi only smiled. Some dates are too important to forget. She walked away before the receptionist could thank her properly, already focused on preparing another busy day. Later that morning, a newly hired analyst accidentally confused two confidential presentation files moments before an important client meeting. His face turned pale as he realized the mistake. Before panic could spread, Naomi quietly stepped beside him, reorganized the documents in less than a minute, and calmly explained how to avoid the same error in the future. "Everyone starts somewhere," she said kindly. "Do not let one mistake convince you that you do not belong here." The young analyst entered the conference room looking relieved instead of defeated. Daniel observed the entire exchange through the glass walls of his office. Once again, Naomi had solved a problem without making anyone feel embarrassed. She protected people's confidence as carefully as she organized business contracts. During lunch, Daniel noticed another detail that had somehow escaped him for years. At exactly 12:30, Naomi gathered her familiar leather tote bag, wished everyone a pleasant afternoon, and quietly left the building alone. She never joined coworkers at nearby restaurants, never accepted invitations to expensive cafes, and always returned 55 minutes later carrying the same peaceful expression. The routine never changed. Curious, Daniel casually asked the executive assistant from the finance department, "Does Miss Carter usually leave every day at the same time?" The assistant nodded. "Every weekday. She has done that since before I joined the company." "Do you know where she goes?" Daniel asked. The assistant smiled politely and shrugged. "No one really knows. She never talks about herself." That simple answer lingered in Daniel's thoughts throughout the afternoon. Naomi knew everyone's stories. She remembered anniversaries, family illnesses, children's graduations, and retirement plans. Yet almost nobody knew anything about her own life beyond the office walls. As evening approached, Daniel remained standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, while city lights slowly replaced the fading sunlight. Below, thousands of people hurried along crowded sidewalks, each carrying unseen responsibilities behind carefully composed expressions. He looked back toward Naomi's desk where she quietly finished organizing the following day's schedule before turning off her computer exactly on time. She picked up the same worn leather tote bag, smiled warmly at the cleaning staff, and disappeared into the elevator without drawing attention to herself. Daniel realized he had spent years believing that successful leaders understood the people who worked for them. The truth was far different. He knew Naomi's calendar, her efficiency, and her remarkable professionalism, but he knew almost nothing about the woman herself. And for reasons he could not fully explain, he found himself wanting to understand where those 55 quiet minutes carried her every afternoon, not because he doubted her, but because he had begun to respect her far more than he ever expected. The question quietly followed Daniel Romano through every meeting that week. At exactly 12:30 each afternoon, Naomi Carter picked up the same worn leather tote bag, smiled politely to everyone she passed, and left Romano Global Headquarters with the same calm expression she carried through every challenge. She never hurried. She never appeared distracted. She simply disappeared for less than an hour before returning to her desk with renewed focus, ready to continue another demanding afternoon. No one seemed to know where she went, and no one appeared curious enough to ask. Daniel finally adjusted his own lunch schedule without mentioning it to anyone. When 12:30 arrived on Friday, he watched from the executive office as Naomi crossed the marble lobby and stepped onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. Keeping a respectful distance, he followed her through several city blocks. She passed crowded restaurants, elegant cafes, and luxury boutiques without slowing down. Instead, she continued toward a quiet neighborhood where tree-lined streets replaced towering office buildings. After another few minutes, she stopped outside a modest community care center surrounded by flower gardens and shaded benches. The building looked welcoming rather than impressive, filled with warmth instead of luxury. Naomi entered with the familiarity of someone returning home. Daniel remained outside briefly before walking inside himself. Soft piano music drifted gently through the bright lobby, while volunteers greeted elderly residents by name. Sunlight poured through wide windows onto comfortable reading chairs, bookshelves, and colorful quilts folded neatly beside each seat. The atmosphere felt peaceful, almost untouched by the hurried pace of the city only a few blocks away. A volunteer smiled kindly as Daniel paused near the reception desk. "May I help you?" she asked. Daniel answered politely, "I am looking for someone who just arrived." Before the volunteer could respond, gentle laughter echoed from a nearby activity room. Daniel glanced through the partially open doorway and immediately saw Naomi seated beside an elderly gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes. She patiently helped him complete a simple wooden puzzle, celebrating each finished piece as though it were a remarkable achievement. When he repeated the same childhood story several times, she listened with genuine interest every single time, smiling warmly without correcting him or revealing that she had heard it before. Afterward, She carefully unpacked a homemade lunch from her leather tote bag, arranging every container neatly before reminding him to drink water and enjoy each bite. Her movements reflected quiet devotion born from long practice rather than obligation. Daniel remained motionless in the hallway. The volunteer stepped beside him and lowered her voice. She visits every weekday during her lunch break. Daniel looked toward the older gentleman. Is he family? The volunteer nodded gently. He is her adoptive father. He spent decades serving this neighborhood through a small community health clinic before memory loss changed his life. Miss Carter has never stopped showing up. No matter how busy work becomes, she comes here every weekday because he always remembers that she will. Daniel watched Naomi gently straighten the older man's sweater before laughing with him over another familiar story. There were no clients to impress, no executives watching, and no recognition waiting at the end of the visit. There was only love expressed through ordinary moments that most people would never witness. Standing quietly beneath the warm afternoon light, Daniel realized he had not uncovered a secret about Naomi. He had discovered the foundation of her character, and in that silent room filled with patience, dignity, and compassion, he finally understood why one woman could quietly change the lives of so many people without ever asking the world to notice. Daniel Romano left the community care center without allowing Naomi Carter to notice that he had been there. As he walked back toward the heart of Manhattan, the familiar rhythm of the city seemed strangely different. Towering glass buildings still reflected the afternoon sunlight, traffic continued flowing through crowded streets, and business leaders hurried toward meetings that promised another profitable quarter. Yet Daniel found himself thinking not about contracts or investments, but about a simple homemade lunch carefully packed inside a worn leather tote bag. For years, he had believed that true leadership meant making difficult decisions with confidence and keeping personal emotions separate from business. That belief suddenly felt incomplete. The following Monday morning, Romano Global Headquarters resumed its usual pace. Executives discussed expansion strategies, financial reports covered polished conference tables, and international conference calls filled every hour of the schedule. Naomi greeted everyone with the same quiet professionalism she had always displayed, never mentioning her daily visits to the care center or the sacrifices hidden behind her calm smile. Daniel watched her move effortlessly through another demanding day, solving unexpected problems before they became crises and encouraging anxious employees without drawing attention to herself. During an executive budget meeting later that afternoon, the chief financial officer proposed reducing several employee assistance programs to lower long-term operating expenses. Among the recommendations were fewer paid caregiver leave days, stricter family support policies, and reduced flexibility for employees responsible for elderly relatives. Several executives nodded while reviewing spreadsheets filled with projected savings. Daniel listened silently until every opinion had been expressed. Then he closed the report in front of him and looked around the conference table. How many employees currently provide regular care for aging parents, guardians, or family members? He asked. The Human Resources Director quickly reviewed her records before answering. More than 60 across all departments. Daniel remained thoughtful for a brief moment before speaking again. Then those programs are not unnecessary expenses. They allow dedicated people to continue doing exceptional work without abandoning the people who once cared for them. The room became noticeably quieter. Daniel continued in the calm voice that had guided countless business decisions. Instead of reducing support, expand it. Increase paid caregiver leave. Create more flexible scheduling options. Strengthen employee counseling services. We invest in buildings, technology, and equipment every year. It is time we invest with the same commitment in the people who make this company possible. No one challenged the decision. The meeting simply moved forward with revised instructions. Over the following days, Human Resources quietly began preparing the new policies. Naomi received the updated documents for administrative review without knowing why such unexpected changes had appeared. She carefully organized the paperwork before carrying it into Daniel's office. These improvements will make a real difference for many families, she said sincerely. I believe people will be grateful. Daniel accepted the folder with a quiet smile. That is exactly what I hope. Naomi nodded appreciatively before returning to her desk, believing thoughtful leadership had simply reached the same conclusion she quietly wished every workplace would someday reach. She never imagined that one ordinary lunch hour, one carefully repaired blouse, and one lifetime of silent compassion had inspired decisions that would soon ease the burdens carried by dozens of families she would probably never meet. Watching her walk back through the executive office with the same humility she had always carried, Daniel understood something he had never fully appreciated before. Genuine influence is rarely announced with applause. More often, it begins when one person's quiet example gives another person the courage to change the lives of many. Several weeks passed, and the new employee support policies quietly became part of everyday life at Romano Global Headquarters. The changes did not appear on the front page of financial magazines, and they were never announced with dramatic speeches. Instead, they revealed themselves in small moments that most executives would never have noticed. A senior project manager could now accompany his father to weekly medical treatments without sacrificing his career. A young accountant no longer worried about choosing between work and caring for her grandmother after surgery. Employees smiled more often, stress slowly gave way to gratitude, and the atmosphere inside the company felt noticeably warmer. Naomi Carter observed every improvement with quiet satisfaction, believing the leadership team had simply recognized what people truly needed. She continued arriving before sunrise, preparing executive schedules, organizing confidential files, and helping coworkers with the same humility she had shown from her very first day. She never connected those new policies to herself. In her mind, she had only done what anyone should do for another human being. Late one evening, after the final executive meeting had ended and the city lights sparkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Daniel Romano asked Naomi if she could remain for a few extra minutes before leaving. She entered his office carrying her notebook, expecting another revision to the following day's agenda. Instead, she found 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee waiting on the conference table beside the glowing Manhattan skyline. Daniel motioned politely toward the chair across from him. "Please have a seat." Naomi smiled appreciatively and sat down, curious but completely at ease. A comfortable silence settled between them before Daniel finally spoke. "There is something I have wanted to tell you for quite some time." Naomi listened attentively without interrupting. Daniel took a slow breath before continuing. "The evening I accidentally opened the wrong door, I believed I had made nothing more than an embarrassing mistake. Looking back now, I realize it became one of the most important moments of my life." Naomi lowered her eyes for a brief moment, remembering that unexpected encounter. Daniel continued gently. "I did not remember the room. I remembered the blouse you had repaired so carefully. I remembered the sewing kit beside it. At first I wondered why someone as talented as you would spend time repairing old clothes. Then I began noticing how you quietly repaired confidence, relationships, and difficult days for everyone around you. You never simply fixed fabric. You restored people." Naomi remained silent, visibly moved by words she had never expected to hear. Daniel looked toward the skyline before speaking once more. "I also know where you spend your lunch hour. I visited the community care center after seeing you leave one afternoon. I never meant to intrude on your private life, but what I witnessed changed the way I understand responsibility." Naomi looked surprised for only a moment before offering a gentle smile. "He always believed that caring for someone is never an interruption," she said softly, thinking of her adoptive father. "He taught me that if love only appears when life is convenient, then it was never really love." Daniel nodded with sincere admiration. "He gave you a remarkable lesson. Through you, he gave one to me as well." Neither of them spoke again for several moments. The silence felt peaceful rather than uncomfortable. Outside, countless lights stretched across the Manhattan skyline, while inside the elegant office 2 people from completely different worlds quietly discovered that respect is never created by titles, wealth, or authority. It grows from ordinary choices made with extraordinary kindness when no one believes anyone else is watching. The weeks following that quiet conversation brought changes no organizational chart could fully explain. Romano Global Headquarters still operated with the same precision that had made it successful, yet the atmosphere inside the building had become noticeably different. Executives who once hurried through the hallways without looking up now paused to greet reception staff by name. Managers asked employees how their families were doing before discussing deadlines. Small gestures of appreciation quietly replaced habits of routine, and without realizing it, people began treating kindness as part of professionalism instead of something separate from it. Naomi Carter noticed the difference but never searched for an explanation. She continued arriving before sunrise with the same worn leather tote bag resting on her shoulder, preparing conference rooms, reviewing executive schedules, and making certain every meeting began exactly on time. She still encouraged nervous interns before presentations, still repaired loose buttons or torn sleeves whenever someone quietly asked for help, and still slipped handwritten notes of encouragement onto desks after difficult weeks. Recognition had not changed her because recognition had never been her purpose. One crisp autumn evening, Romano Global hosted its annual employee appreciation gathering inside the company's grand event hall overlooking the Hudson River. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while hundreds of employees gathered around elegantly decorated tables celebrating another successful year. Traditionally, the evening focused on financial achievements, leadership milestones, and record-breaking projects. This year, however, Daniel Romano requested one additional award that had never appeared on the program before. As the lights gently dimmed, Daniel stepped onto the stage carrying a simple envelope rather than an expensive crystal trophy. Curious conversations faded into silence as every eye turned toward him. He looked across the audience for a long moment before speaking. "Every year we recognize measurable success," he said calmly. "Tonight I would like to recognize something that cannot be measured by numbers. Some people improve a company through strategy. Others improve it simply by the way they treat the people around them." The room became completely still. Daniel continued, "This recognition belongs to someone whose kindness has strengthened this organization in ways many of us never fully noticed until recently." Naomi looked up with quiet surprise as Daniel spoke her name. Applause immediately filled the ballroom, growing louder as employees smiled, nodded, and gradually rose to their feet without anyone asking them to do so. One by one, nearly every person in the room stood in sincere appreciation. Naomi slowly walked toward the stage, visibly humbled by the unexpected response. Daniel handed her the envelope before speaking softly enough that only the nearby microphones carried his words. "This recognition is not for the work everyone sees. It is for the character you demonstrate when no one believes anyone is watching." Naomi accepted the envelope with both hands and paused for a brief moment before answering. "If I have helped anyone here, it is because so many people have shown kindness to me throughout my own life. Compassion grows stronger when it is shared." Her words were simple, yet they filled the room with a warmth no carefully prepared speech could have created. As she returned to her seat, co-workers embraced one another, exchanging quiet smiles and memories of moments when Naomi had encouraged them during difficult seasons. Daniel watched the scene unfold with quiet gratitude. He realized that genuine leadership was not measured by the number of people who followed a leader. It was measured by the number of people who became better human beings because they had shared the same workplace. And on that unforgettable evening, one humble secretary reminded an entire company that the strongest legacy anyone can leave behind begins with ordinary kindness practiced every single day. The days following the employee appreciation gathering quietly confirmed that the evening had been more than a ceremony. It had become the beginning of a different culture. Conversations inside Romano Global Headquarters gradually changed. Employees who had once rushed through the hallways now paused to offer help before anyone needed to ask. Department leaders began mentoring younger co-workers with greater patience. Small acts of generosity spread naturally from one office to another, not because they were required by company policy, but because people had witnessed the difference a single compassionate person could make. Naomi Carter continued living exactly as she always had. Every weekday morning she arrived before sunrise carrying the same worn leather tote bag, prepared executive schedules with flawless precision, greeted every employee with sincere warmth, and quietly solved problems before they reached anyone else's desk. At lunch, she still walked to the community care center carrying homemade meals for her adoptive father, never imagining that her quiet example had inspired changes reaching far beyond her own life. One rainy afternoon, Daniel Romano remained inside his office reviewing quarterly reports when Human Resources delivered a folder filled with letters from employees describing how the new caregiver policies had affected their families. One father explained that he could finally attend physical therapy appointments with his disabled son without risking his career. A marketing manager wrote that she no longer feared losing her position while caring for her aging mother after surgery. Another employee simply wrote, "For the first time, I do not have to choose between being a good worker and being a good daughter." Daniel slowly closed the folder and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows toward the rain falling across Manhattan. Every decision inside those pages could be traced back to one accidental moment and one woman who had never intended to influence anyone beyond her daily responsibilities. That afternoon, Daniel quietly left the office carrying several unmarked boxes. Instead of returning home, he drove to the community care center where Naomi's adoptive father spent each day. The director welcomed him warmly, recognizing him from his previous visit. Daniel asked only one question: what would help the families who come here the most? The answer was simple. Many relatives struggled to stay connected during working hours because the center lacked updated technology and comfortable family gathering spaces. Without requesting recognition, Daniel arranged for new reading areas, comfortable furniture, secure video communication equipment, and additional family activity rooms to be installed over the following weeks. He specifically instructed every contractor that no plaque, announcement, or donation record should identify the source. When the renovations were complete, families gathered more comfortably than ever before, children laughed while reading stories with grandparents, and loved ones who lived in other states could finally speak face-to-face through new video connections. Naomi noticed every improvement during her daily visits, thanking the staff for the wonderful changes while assuming generous community supporters had made everything possible. Watching her adoptive father smile as he comfortably read beside a large sunlit window filled her heart with quiet gratitude. She never searched for the name behind the gift because she believed the kindness itself mattered far more than the person who offered it. Back at Romano Global Headquarters, Daniel resumed his responsibilities with the same discipline he had always possessed, yet those closest to him noticed something impossible to measure. His decisions had become steadier, his leadership more thoughtful, and his understanding of success far deeper than before. Without announcing it to anyone, he had learned that the greatest influence a leader can ever possess begins not with commanding attention, but with quietly following the example of someone whose compassion has already changed the world around them. Several months quietly passed, and Romano Global Headquarters no longer resembled the company it had once been. The polished marble floors, towering glass walls, and breathtaking views of the Manhattan skyline remained unchanged, but the spirit within those walls had transformed in ways no architect could have designed. New employees quickly discovered that success inside the company was measured not only by intelligence and performance, but also by integrity, compassion, and the willingness to lift others without expecting recognition. Managers listened more carefully, coworkers supported one another more naturally, and kindness gradually became part of the organization's identity rather than an occasional gesture. Naomi Carter never changed the way she lived. Every weekday she still arrived before sunrise carrying the same familiar leather tote bag, carefully prepared executive schedules, welcomed visitors with warmth, encouraged nervous coworkers, and quietly disappeared during lunch to spend precious time with her adoptive father at the community care center. She continued repairing small tears instead of replacing perfectly useful clothing, believing that gratitude was found in caring for what one already had rather than constantly seeking something new. The award resting inside her office drawer remained untouched. Tucked beside handwritten notes from grateful coworkers and family photographs, she treasured far more than public recognition. Daniel Romano also continued following the disciplined routine that had built his reputation, yet everyone closest to him understood that something fundamental had changed. His authority remained unquestioned, but it was now balanced by genuine empathy. Before approving major business decisions, he regularly asked how those choices would affect employees and their families. The answer mattered just as much as financial projections. Quietly, without announcements or publicity, He continued supporting community organizations, expanding employee assistance programs, and creating opportunities for people whose dedication often went unnoticed. One cool autumn evening, after another successful business day, Daniel walked through the executive floor as employees prepared to leave for home. Passing Naomi's desk, he noticed the same small sewing kit resting neatly beside her notebook. Next to it lay a brand new white blouse, carefully folded and ready for the following morning. Naomi smiled as she placed the old hand-stitched blouse into her tote bag instead of throwing it away. "I thought you finally replaced it," Daniel said with a gentle smile. Naomi laughed softly. "I did, but this one still reminds me to be thankful for every season that helped me become who I am." Daniel nodded quietly, understanding that the blouse had never represented poverty. It represented resilience, humility, and the quiet strength to keep moving forward without bitterness. They walked together toward the elevators as evening sunlight faded behind the city skyline. Neither of them spoke for several moments because silence often carries truths that words cannot improve. When the elevator doors finally opened, Daniel turned toward Naomi one last time. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Naomi looked surprised. "For what?" Daniel smiled with quiet gratitude. "For teaching me that the most valuable people in any room are often the ones asking for nothing at all." Naomi answered with the same peaceful smile that had guided countless people through difficult days. "Sometimes all any of us need is someone willing to truly see us." The elevator doors closed gently, carrying them toward another ordinary evening that no newspaper would ever report and no business magazine would ever celebrate. Yet somewhere between one accidental mistake and one carefully repaired blouse, an entire company had learned that genuine leadership begins with humility, lasting influence grows through compassion, and the greatest victories are often the quiet ones that transform hearts long before they transform the world. And on that unforgettable journey, everyone who witnessed their story was reminded that dignity is never given by power, wealth, or titles. It is revealed through everyday choices made with kindness when nobody believes anyone else is watching.